This is a presentation of Wolter Elbersen from Food and Biobased Research, an institute linked to Wageningen University in the Netherlands. His specialty is the application of non-food biomass. Part of his work is to make the supply chain sustainable and to research how to give a sustainable use to byproducts, for example, palm oil, sugarcane, and pineapple byproducts. He has no specific knowledge on Bolivia, but is familiar with similar issues in Colombia and Brazil. He will share this presentation in English. The presentation has been part of a roundtable meeting about biofuels in Bolivia, where also contrary points of view have been shared and debated.
My agenda is, well, first, what is bioenergy? Why do we do it? It's a very important question. Then bioenergy is heat, electricity, and transport fuels. Then I will go into sustainability, and I will look at oil palm as an example. First, biomass. Biomass is everything that grows in a short circle. We are biomass. Everything that's going outside is biomass. And biomass is also stored energy. Here you see that you can see by the composition how much energy there is in biomass. For instance, in wood, you see it's CHO and ash, and in general, biomass has a lower energy content. But you can also make ethanol out of it, which has a higher content. So you take sugars, ferment it, and you make ethanol. You can also make biodiesel if you have oil. So the first thing is, and if you burn it, you generate CO2 again. Now, why did people want to do bioenergy? Of course, we have always done it. Let's say traditional biomass, bioenergy, which is often quite polluting, especially in third world countries, where you have all kinds of issues with bioenergy. But at the same time, we do have a lot of underutilized biomass. And biomass can be used to replace fossil fuels. Not all fossil fuels, we use far too many of that, but it can give a real contribution. One of the nice things is that biomass can be used in existing infrastructure. So you can make a biofuel for cars, ships, airplanes. You can, you heat instead of coal or natural gas, and you can also generate electricity. So it fits relatively well. As said, biomass is stored carbon, and at this moment, we're not only using at fuels, but also at chemicals. And one of the big issues is, of course, why do we not like fossil fuels anymore? That's because of the greenhouse gas emissions. And if we do biomass, bioenergy right, we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. In my opinion, that's the #1 reason for doing bioenergy. As said, bioenergy is short circle. That means when you use it, you emit CO2, and over the season, the CO2 is captured again. And this is illustrated by the line of CO2 emissions as they are measured over, well, in time, but also within the year. And you see here, it goes up and down, and that is the yearly cycle. So this is because most of the land is in the north, and in winter and fall, biomass that is produced is mostly decaying, and then in spring it starts growing again. So you get this effect. So biomass, if you don't use it, it will probably turn itself into CO2 anyhow. As said, we have 3 types essentially. One is heat, electricity, and transport fuels. For Bolivia, heat and electricity are probably not the big issues. Heat, well, I just saw it may be cold, but you do not have a heater. Maybe for some cooking. And transport fuels is a real issue because that costs a lot of fossil fuels and a lot of money. If you look at policies, you see worldwide that countries are interested in bioenergy, in general biofuels, but why they do it differs. So you really have to look into that. It can be just an economic issue. You want to reduce the cost of importing fuels, fossil fuels. Sometimes it's an environmental issue. The United States started producing a lot of ethanol just to reduce the emissions in winter in a lot of areas. So they just added ethanol, and then you have less ozone and a few other emissions. But in a lot of countries, not in the least United States and in Europe, but also in Brazil, Colombia, and I understand Bolivia, there's a social component to it. So you want to help farming. So give farmers more income. And the other thing is also energy security. Though I have my doubts about that, because we have seen that fossil fuels are really not ending. Yes, they're still cheap, and we have a lot of coal, and even Saudi Arabia has so much oil, we can go on almost forever. The issue is greenhouse gas. Now, Bolivia, as I understand it, is interested in biofuels to produce ethanol and biodiesel to reduce imports and help farmers. Well, that is possible, of course, but you have to be really careful that you do not make mistakes and don't achieve any greenhouse gas improvements, or that you have effects on biodiversity. Just to illustrate, especially lignocellulosic material, which is fibers, is very abundant in this world. Many crop residues are underutilized, and they cause pollution problems. Here you see a bale of straw in Ukraine that's not being used. Here you see a straw that is being burnt in Ukraine. I think my next picture also shows this. This is the leaves of sugarcane that are being burnt before the harvest. You're just emitting, you're burning 10 tons of biomass here and causing a lot of pollution and losing quite a lot of nitrogen on the way too. The right, you see people burning their fields to get rid of the vegetation to start planting again. There are good reasons to do it, but it's very wasteful. Here you see a picture of an Indian farmer burning his rice straw, leading to terrible pollution problems and also emitting CO2 without it having any purpose. You know, it's just the CO2 goes into the air and the pollution. It's a waste. And on the right, you see my colleague standing in a field of sugarcane trash, which is left in the fields because it's not allowed anymore to burn it in the field. But now it's left in the field. And this is a huge amount. You see here, this is 14 tons of dry matter. That's the same amount of dry matter that a whole hectare of maize will produce in the Netherlands. And it's slowly decaying. Even for the soil, this is probably far too much than is useful. Then transport fuels. At this moment, we are producing biodiesel. And here you see the formulas. You get an oil, you add methanol, you add a very simple catalyzer, you produce glycerol, the stuff you put on your face or on your hands, or you feed to animals, or you make all kinds of nice chemicals from, and you make fatty acid methyl ester, which are long chains that look a lot like diesel and which can be mixed in. And that is what we make to run our cars on oil, essentially. And so in the Netherlands and in Europe, I think we drive on average on 5% of this biodiesel. The other big option is making ethanol. Ethanol is what, we almost do my mistake if we leave our fruit out too long. The essence is a fermentation. So you get glucose, you ferment it, you get ethanol, and then you distill it out, and you can drive your car on it. That is what is happening a lot in Brazil, but also in Europe. So the simple thing is, so the issue is you use oil, sugars, starch. The problem is, of course, that we also eat it. We do not eat fiber, we eat this material. And that is also where one of the issues is about, and that is that we are using first generation technologies to convert this material into fuels. And the good thing about this is it's pretty easy. These technologies have been around forever, and you actually can make biodiesel in your own kitchen. You shouldn't do it, but you can do it. The feedstock is readily available. You can just order 100 tons or 100,000 tons, and they'll deliver it here in the Netherlands by ship within a few weeks. And if you do it right, the greenhouse gas balance within the chain can be positive. So at least 50%, 60, 70% better than fossil fuels, assuming you regrow the feedstock. But there's also issues. The prices go up and down. You compete with food and feed. And if you have a big demand, it's likely your agriculture will start expanding, leading to so-called indirect land use change. So it's not the farmer you bought it from is chopping down rainforest or converting grasslands, but someone else has to buy more material. And if this is big, then you can indeed say that land use is being changed. So you're converting forests or grasslands into agriculture. And in many areas of the world, this is indeed happening. Not in Europe, there we go almost the other way around. Agriculture is getting more efficient and we're releasing land. But this is happening. One of the solutions that everyone is betting on is to start using lignocellulose residues or even low-cost crops. So you use fiber, and that is wood and processing residues. And fiber is very abundant. The picture I showed you there is mostly fiber burning. And you can grow very efficient crops on released land, which we have a lot of in Europe and the United States. You have also very low quality land that could be used that way. And the material is generally quite low in cost because it's a residue or it's a low-cost crop. And the problem, however, is it's tougher to convert this fiber into a fuel. So what you save in cheaper feedstock, you have to invest in a much more complicated factory. And to get this all going, you will have to mobilize it. So you have to get all these things set up. You cannot just call and ask someone to send me 50,000 tons of palm oil, which is possible. And the other thing is that you also have all kinds of processes if you would like to use it, for instance, for chemicals. And this is a bit the holy grail. This is what we would like to do. Now, the issues of sustainability. I always explain the greenhouse gas effect here, because this is key to the whole discussion, in my opinion. The greenhouse gas means solar radiation goes through the atmosphere, and part of it is intercepted very high, and part of it is reflected when it hits the Earth. And it's reflected as infrared radiation, and then trapped by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And these greenhouse gases are CO2, methane, and N2O, laughing gas, and a few others. And that means that if we can live here because of these gases. The problem is if we get more of them, then we trap more and it heats up. The problem is, of course, that we have been emitting these gases for the last 100 years at very high rates. And now, yeah, the the amount of these greenhouse gases is so high that it's really heating up. Now, why is biomass CO2 neutral? Well, here you see the process, CO2 plus water. The plants make glucose. With glucose, we make all kinds of stuff, but when you burn it, 6 glucose and 6 water are released again. So in principle, it is CO2 neutral, as you saw with this yearly up and down in greenhouse gas emissions. But there are a few issues, of course, that you have to address. It only works if the greenhouse gas balance of what you're doing is positive compared to fossil fuel. We know the EU tells us how much fossil fuel emits, which is at this moment, I think, 96 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. That is for biodiesel or for ethanol. By the way, it would be great if oil companies would register what this number really is. But that's all politics. The production chain has to be efficient, not reduce carbon stocks. This is one of the things that if you chop down a rainforest, you'll see that in a moment, then your emissions are huge. And if you emit a lot of methane by letting stuff rot away, or if you add a lot of fertilizer, much more than you need, you release a lot of N2O. And N2O is very, very important greenhouse gas. So overall, if people look at this performance within the chain, you see that they are about, well, this depends on how you set it all up, but if you do it right and these calculations are made, then you are significantly better than a fossil fuel. And here you see all these things I will show you later. Now, one of the big problems is if you start using land, well, you can use land that was previously used for some other crop. You can also start with virgin land, or indirectly let someone else then go away and chop down rainforest or convert grasslands. We made this little picture here, and here you see that you're growing sugarcane, which was previously grassland. And if you do that, you will emit, so the amount of carbon that is stored, you will lose 10 to 50 tons of carbon per hectare. Carbon is CO2. And so let's say there were cows here, and you go there and you put your sugarcane in those grasslands. Then the cows, where do they go? Well, they go to the grass, to the natural grassland, cerrado, or they go into the Amazon. And if you convert Amazon to grassland, then your emissions are 200 to 300 tons of carbon per hectare. So the amount of carbon is reduced. And you do save CO2 if you make sugarcane. Here you see this. So people have made calculations, and they say if you have a hectare of sugarcane or a hectare of palm oil, and you don't use fossil fuel, you can save, if you do it right, 10 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. But converting natural land can also emit up to 600 tons of CO2 in one go. And so you get a so-called carbon debt. And every year you pay back 10 tons, but you have emitted 500 tons. So it takes you 50 years to undo this. Now that's the theory. And of course, this is very direct. In general, this is indirect. And then you have many effects.
Wolter, nog 5 minuten. Dat goed? Nog 5 minuten.
Okay. Now people have made these calculations, and there's a lot of talk and fight, etc., and you see it can be significant. So the whole thing is, if I buy these feedstocks, I make biodiesel or ethanol, then, well, the price goes up. I compete with food or feed, which is not a terrible problem as long as the prices are low. But it can also happen that this effect means that other people will say, well, let's convert some land, we can make money, and they turn grasslands or forest. But then you have these greenhouse gas emissions, and it's also not good for biodiversity. So the trick is to try to get more from the same amount of land, and that is quite possible. We wrote an article where we argued that we should vary the demand for these biofuels according to the price. So at a high price, you make no biofuels, and at a low price, you do. The low price helps farmers to invest when it needs to be done. You know, the price is higher, they can still invest and keep the productivity of their land going. The other way around, the price is high, you just turn off your biodiesel plant, which is a very cheap plant anyhow, and then you do not have a food problem. So these are the type of solutions you can find for first generation biofuels. Now, biodiesel, well, if you have palm, you produce oil and you produce a lot of residues, and you also have palm oil mill effluent, which emits methane. And I have a little film here. Let me see. This waste literally emits methane. I'm talking in the picture, but you see the bubbles coming up. Okay. In this case, the rule do not emit a lot of methane was broken in this system. And actually most palm systems, they produce a watery residue, and the methane is emitted until the BOD levels are low enough to release it into a river or so. And if you look at this number, here you see the emissions due to methane, and here you see this is the greenhouse gas effect per kilogram of ton of oil. And so if you add these two up, you get a huge emission per ton. And fossil fuel is just better or hardly worse. But if you cap it, then you get a wonderful greenhouse gas balance within the chain. And so this is one of the things. If Bolivia wants to make biodiesel from palm oil, then within the chain, they will have to fix these things. So they will have to make biogas and use that for make sure it doesn't go into the air. Another thing they could do is to try to use these residues, because these residues in oil palm, and many other residues, by the way, are generally underutilized. So if you do that right, you can also make so-called second generation. So base your biofuels on the lignocellulosic material. And yeah, there's a technology, and you essentially make an oil out of lignocellulose. And this oil you can then bring to a refinery, a normal oil refinery, and make the same product. And if you have these residues, and if you take care that you do not that you still maintain the soil quality where these residues generally end up, then this is a great idea, and you have a lot of this material. Okay, as said, then you can make all these nice things out of the material, and you're essentially also driving on biofuels. So my message is that biofuels can be sustainable when done right. Unfortunately, you see everywhere in the world that policies make mistakes. Policy making is extremely difficult. I don't envy the policymakers, but they can do a better job, and I hope they do that in Bolivia. thank you very much.